Hi, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ty Brown Show. I'm excited to be here with you today. It's going to be kind of a laid-back, short episode today, just talking about some stories and fun conflict. Fun conflict, that sounds like a silly thing, but actually I think that's true. Some fun conflict stories. We're going into the Wild West today. Car accidents, town meetings, and traffic school. Yes.
Podcasting from Conciliators, this is the Ty Brown Show. If you're a human and you think you might have to interact with other humans at some point, and you'd like that to go well, then listen up.
Oh, yeah.
It's time to get cozy with conflict. Let's go.
So, are you curious to hear how many listeners we've had? Our listener count continues to climb. I think on the strength of Josh Hogan's network, we were able to amass 1,133 listeners. So thank you, Josh. And, having guests on the show is a lot of fun. and it's neat, too, that they can help further the cause of the dispute resolution revolution. For those of you who may be listening for the first time, the mission of this show is to help everybody disagree better, to feel a little bit less afraid of conflict, and to know how to interact with each other with a little more skill. And that's what we're all about. Hopefully this will improve your life, and you can improve your marriages, your relationships with your kids, your parents, your coworkers, your friends, and with the people who disagree with you politically, just like we learned last week from Josh. Okay, so I had a good suggestion. I am not the most savvy social media guy. Someone told me that it would probably make some sense to to post a little bit more frequently on Facebook and other social media networks, and to give listeners just a more kind of a fun glimpse, just a little preview, I guess, into the lives of me and my family, because I'm telling all these stories about my kids and my wife and me, and so yeah, I'm going to start to post a little bit more on social media, and hopefully most of them will be funny, and hopefully the goal of that, of course, is to further the cause here, the dispute resolution revolution. Just by way of introduction, I am Ty Brown, and I help resolve conflicts for a living, and I wanted to bring the benefits of dispute resolution to everyday disputes for everyday people, and that's why this show was started. And I think we're up. What is this? Is it like our 12th episode, maybe? So anyway, it's marching right along. All right. So I got. Let's see here. I need to write down better notes. I was listening to some of these episodes on the way down to St. George with my wife and kids. We were going down for the St. George Marathon, which my wife ran and I did not. I can't even run around the block. So yeah, it wasn't me. But anyway, we went down, we listened to some of these, and it occurred to me, I was like, man, I'm always just shooting from the hip when I do these. I just come in usually on a Monday and record them and just kind of go for it. But maybe I should structure them just a little better. I can tell those moments where my mind is kind of swimming, and all you listeners are probably like, oh man, come on, get to the point, Ty. So I'm going to work on that as well. So going into our review of last week we talked about how to win arguments for reals, how just exchanging verbal blows, even if you kind of are able to pin the other person down, unless you're in a court, there's really no measurable benefit to doing that. If your goal is to influence or to change somebody's mind, it just doesn't really work out. And so instead, the real way to win these arguments is to work towards understanding and learning. And that is a win. You're getting somewhere if you can accomplish that. And we had Josh Hogan on. He told the story about a political debate between his twin brother Noah and his friend Sage, and how it just was kind of this cantankerous exchange, and then it was smoothed over. There was mutual understanding, and that was a good thing, and it allowed for the rest of the year for them to engage in really good political discussions, even though they were on opposite spectrums of things. And that's kind of special. That's sort of a cool thing. So I'm hoping that other people can learn from Josh and parrot that same sort of experience in your own lives. I'm sure you have friends who disagree with you politically, and it's possible to have those relationships be super strong and to have your conversations be very enjoyable, even though there's not a consensus. So that was last week. Q&A. Yeah, this was a suggestion from a couple weeks ago to do a little Q&A, and I didn't receive hardly any questions. I got 2, and they were both from the same person. So I thought I would just kind of base the show off of these 2 questions, because they were both really, really good questions, and they lend themselves to some fun stories. So first question was this: how do you handle a real dominant personality who's a poor listener? You know, a know-it-all where you can't get a word in edgewise to be part of the conversation. This is a really good question because it's something we encounter a lot. One of the best things to know going into, or I guess if you find yourself in such a conversation with a real dominant personality who has taken full control of the conversation and is not allowing you an entrance, boy, I've got like a lot of thoughts swimming in my head right now. I guess first and most fundamentally, there is a reason why people do this. And I'm trying to remember which book uses this term. But there's this internal voice in our heads that can get really loud. And when we feel real strongly about something, that internal voice, it's really screaming at us. And it makes it almost impossible for us to listen. And a lot of times if you're in a conversation where somebody is just completely dominating and there's no way to get in, a lot of times it's because they just cannot listen. They're not in a mental space where they're capable of considering anything. They have a need to just get everything off their chest. And sometimes you'll experience the same thing. You'll be in a conversation where you find like you just can't listen. You're unable to absorb, to empathize, to listen, to do any of these like real, kind of listening 101 skills. And the reason is there's just something boiling up that just, until it is expressed, until your feelings have been expressed to your own satisfaction, there's just not going to be any listening done. And if you ever notice that, you can always just tell the other person, just say, look, I just have to get this out there because until I do, I feel like I can't take anything else in. And then you just lay it all out there. So anyway, a lot of times when you find somebody who has a real dominant control over a conversation, a lot of times it's not so much their personality, it's just this really insatiable need to be heard. And the way, I guess, the cure for that is to help them to feel heard. So you do that by empathizing and by kind of reflecting that skill where you can tell someone like, oh, it sounds like, and you just kind of parrot back what you're hearing. And you kind of acknowledge that you hear them, you understand them. So that's kind of one way. But that only covers, a certain percentage of these conversations where someone's really taken control. The other, and probably even the more common scenario is somebody's personality. They're just a real talker, and it's just hard to get in. And there's not like some urgent need, some very loud internal voice that just prevents them from listening. It's just kind of the way they converse. And so my advice on that is kind of just more practical. Ask yourself, do you really need to be part of this conversation? If you can just mentally decide, you know what, I'm okay just not really participating in this conversation, then you stop feeling the anxiety, you stop feeling this like unpleasant, uncomfortable feeling like you got to jump in and be part of it. Just decide, you know what, yeah, I don't really need to be a part of this. I'm happy to just, entertain the conversation. Maybe it's a family member or something. And it just kind of takes the stress and unpleasantness out of it if you just kind of decide, you know what, I really don't need to be heard on this. Doesn't really matter to me. So yeah, just move along if that's the case. So here's I wanted to tell a little story. I met somebody with this dominant, kind of incessant personality last night at traffic school. I was, serving my time for my plea in abeyance so that the speeding ticket I got won't show up on my driving record. Nobody tell my insurance about this, by the way. So I'm sitting there in traffic school. There's just a handful of people there. It's really a small group. And there's this German fellow in the front row who, he kind of sat quiet for the first 15 minutes. And then all of a sudden, just like, just a torrent of commentary just came. And it was nonstop. He was clearly really upset about the ticket he got. It was about, I think he said it was like improper lane changes or too many lane changes. It sounded to me like he was kind of weaving through traffic on the freeway. And to him, he was just being courteous. He was like, hey, I was moving over to let someone in. I was moving over again to let them in. And I was getting back in the lane I should be. And in his mind, it made a lot of sense. You could tell he takes a lot of pride in his driving. And to me, I'm sitting back there thinking like, oh man, this is like he's really worked up about this. And I'm of course thinking about all of these dispute resolution principles. In my mind, I'm like, this is like an identity issue for him. Like he probably thinks he's like a really stellar driver, and he's pretty offended that someone would come out and say like, hey, this driving was irresponsible. When you get cited for weaving, it makes you look like you're a real careless, reckless driver, which it was clear his identity was one like, no, I am a professional. Like I'm very cautious and know what I'm doing. And so anyway, I was thinking like, yeah, there's like an identity thing happening here. And the poor officer is trying his best to like get this guy to come off of the rant, and it just won't stop and just keeps going and going. And the officer's trying to get control of the class and finally just kind of snaps at the guy. He goes, hey, I don't care if you don't like the law. If you don't like the law, that's your own fault. Who's your representative? Have you told your representative about this? Why don't you tell them? Why are you telling me? This is my job to listen to you rant about, and everyone in the class was like super uncomfortable. And I sitting in the back row, just smiling and thinking, this is going to be great material for my podcast. And so when the officer snapped, not so surprisingly, it caused kind of an increase in the intensity of this German guy's response. Like he did not feel heard, even though actually the officer did do like he did some things right. He tried to acknowledge the guy's feeling. He said, I see that you're angry about this, and I understand. I've been angry too about traffic violations and blah blah blah. He was doing a decent job, but when he really snapped and was like, take it up with your representative, that was not a satisfactory answer for the German guy. And this is kind of like the stop hitting yourself segment we always talk about, where we end up inviting the very behavior that bothers us. So anyway, the German fellow, he kind of like digs his heels in deeper and starts really arguing the merits of this citation he got, and then he starts kind of this amazing monologue or soliloquy where he's talking about how in Utah all these laws are not designed for safety. They're just designed. They're just technical rules that produce revenues for the government, and it's getting he's just really getting into it, and now I'm starting to feel the effects of the conflict, right? Like I'm starting to feel like I want to jump in, like I want to say something, I want to set this guy straight, because I'm a lawyer and I deal with the traffic code a lot, and I've represented thousands of clients on accident cases, and I know a thing or two about the laws that are in place, and there is a purpose for them, and the purpose is safety, and there are legislative committees and hearings and lots of people working really hard to develop a traffic code that keeps people safe, right? That's where I'm coming from. And I, fortunately, before I like started, blurting anything out, I kind of realized like, oh yeah, look at this. I have like a different story, different take on this. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna try to assist here because this has gone completely off the rails for like 25 minutes now. And so I raised my hand, and the officer, immediately called on me, hoping that this would stop this guy from his incessant monologue. And so I decided to lead with this kind of identity issue that I had spotted from the outset. And so I asked the guy, I said, hey, it sounds to me like you're a really good driver. Like you take it really seriously, your responsibility behind the wheel, and that this seemed unfair that you would be accused of driving recklessly. And he's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. He goes, in fact, I'm a pilot. I can operate machinery like more skilled than anyone I know. I'm flying airplanes and then he starts talking about the rules of aviation and how you can, blah, blah, blah. And then he says they're much better and they're much safer and all these other things. And I just kind of let him talk for a few seconds. And then I kind of interject again and I start telling him, when it comes to automobile law, I told him, I said, look, I'm a lawyer and I represent people in accidents who get injured by people who are violating these laws. And these laws, they do keep people safe. And when they're violated, it often results in accidents and injuries. And to that, he says, well, yeah, no, I understand that. And I was like, okay, good. It sounds like we're on the same page. Sounds like you're just upset about your ticket. And he was like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, we have a legal process for this. If you're upset about a ticket, you contest it, and a judge decides whether or not your actions were justifiable or not, or if they were, against the law or not. And he says, well, I talked to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor told me that I clearly violated the law and that there was no reason to take it to the judge. And I was like, yeah, the prosecutor, he's not on your side. He's actually against you. He's your opposition. You're the defendant. He's the prosecutor. You shouldn't take legal advice from a prosecutor. That seems silly, right? And he was like, oh, yeah, I guess so. And I was like, well, you've already entered your plea in abeyance. So there's no going back on it now. But just chalk that up as a learning experience. And yeah, it sounds like next time you ought to argue those kinds of things. And he's like, oh yeah, that makes me feel a lot better. And so, and he ended up sitting quietly the rest of the time. And well, he participated appropriately when called upon, but no more rants and ravings, and it just went really well. Anyway, that was kind of an instance where we had a real dominant personality, and I was able to recognize that the reason he's being this way is because there's this identity crisis going on, and once that was acknowledged and made explicit, he was able to feel like, okay, people understand that I am a careful driver. I'm not a hardened criminal. So anyway, that was one instance of how to deal with somebody who you can't get a word in edgewise, real dominant personality who didn't want anyone else to tell them anything. Okay. So yeah, I think the step one when you have someone like that is figure out why they're being that way. And then step two is deciding if you actually want to be a part of the conversation or not. And if not, then just let it go. Walk away. Another tool you can use when you've got somebody like this, a lot of times people who talk a lot have just a little touch of narcissism that makes them, that kind of compels them to command conversations. And maybe that sounds like a little harsh. I don't mean that in like a harsh way. Like we can all exhibit a little bit of narcissism without being full-fledged narcissists. But anyway, when you're dealing with someone who's got a little bit of ego in the game, a good way of getting them to stop talking is to introduce a little bit of a technique David Burns calls stroking, and that's where you're just kind of giving them a little pat on the back. you say, I can tell you know a lot about this. That's a good example of stroking. Or, you always make the right decision on these things, even when it's tough. That's stroking. And I got to tell you, stroking is not only a good skill for communication, but it's also a good way for you to look for a sincere way to compliment people, which kind of opens your mind to their story. If you start trying to give them some props from time to time, even if they're annoying you. But stroking is really effective with people who really dominate conversations. As I'm talking about this, I'm reminded of a classic use of the stroking technique that I observed. We were with my family, my parents, my siblings, their children, my children, in-laws. Anyway, we're all driving back down the mountain from our family cabin up in Timber Lakes. Driving down very snowy road, and there's this curve that's like a real sharp 90-degree blind curve, and we're coming towards the curve, and it's going to go left, right? It's going to go left, and it's completely blind, and there's a big drop off on the right hand side of the road. And so here we are driving, and we're kind of caravanning. There are several cars, and I'm in the front car. My brother-in-law, Travis, is driving. It's a truck, like F-150 truck. He's doing everything textbook. He's going very reasonable speed. We've got chains on the tires. Things are in order, right? Prudent operation of a vehicle. Anyway, as we come to this turn, right as we get around the curve, right to the point where you can see around the curve, there is this big, beefy truck going 2 or 3 times faster than it should on an icy road. And it's, as I'm looking out my window, I see the wheels all lock up, and this thing just slides, just probably 60 feet, just sliding until it hits the front of the truck that my brother-in-law is driving, that I'm sitting in. And as I look a little closer, I realize that this big beefy truck that hit us is the security guard for this place. And this was a long time ago. It's probably 10 years ago, maybe more. Yeah, probably more actually. It's probably like 15 years ago. I don't know. Yeah. And this guy gets out, and my goodness, is he mad? Like, he is so mad. And he's talking about how he's the guy who handles all the accidents up here, and that there are accidents all the time, and that he knows his stuff, and he's accusing my brother-in-law of causing this accident, which to me just seems preposterous, but that's what he's doing. And my dad was in the car behind us. Now, he gets out of the car and he comes up, and he's very calm and collected, making sure everything's okay. All the people. It wasn't a real high speed accident, so he checks on everyone. We're all doing good, and he goes to talk to this security guard, and the security guard is still in this just madness rant, and he's talking, and he goes, you know what? I'm the security guard up here, and I know a lot about accidents. And I remember my dad using stroking really well. He goes, do you now? He goes, I guess that makes sense. You would know a lot about accidents. Tell me what you know. And it was such a surprising reaction. That's why I remember it so well, even though it was a long time ago. Because my dad, he is very good at using force and tone. And he's very difficult to push into a corner, physically and verbally, so to speak. So anyway, it kind of surprised me that he was like, oh yeah, I bet you do know a lot about accidents working up here. Tell me what you know. And the guy's kind of taken aback. He's not even sure how to answer the question. And then finally he starts kind of laying out his argument for why this was Travis's fault and not his. And as he's just ranting about this, and he's real upset, and he's using a lot of, kind of offensive language, and it's kind of inflammatory, I remember my dad just walking around, and he's got like one of those old school video cameras out. And as he's listening to the guy, and he's just kind of taking video of the cars and stuff. And after he's done this and listened for a minute, He said something to the effect of he pulls out the big guns, right? So he's been up to this point. He's been stroking. He says, "Yeah, I think you probably do know a lot about accidents. Tell me what you know." So there was some really good use of stroking, and it kind of now gave him the floor. The other guy had finished his argument, and had been heard out. And then I remember my dad pulling out the big guns. I remember him telling him, I've represented tens of thousands of people injured in auto accidents over the last 30 years. I've been the managing partner at a personal injury firm for basically my entire career. 3 decades of experience there, and I've never lost a jury trial. And I'm thinking with this video, I'm feeling pretty good about my chances on this one. And then he just kind of started showing him some of the specifics. Well, here, let's look at these skid marks. I'm no accident reconstructionist, but it would seem to me, and he kind of goes through all this. And I remember the guy finally, just like in frustration, he just left the conversation. He just stormed off and sat in his truck. And as you might suspect, his insurance ended up paying for all the damages there. But it was such a great use of stroking. And then when he pulled out the big guns and was like, "Yeah, you think you know a lot about accidents, but actually, like, you don't. You really don't." I think the guy realized he was outmatched, and it was kind of a funny story. It just came to mind. Boy, I am into this several minutes, and we are just moving slow. So I'm sorry, guys. Here it goes. I'm going to speed this up. So another tool, if you're dealing with a difficult dominant personality, is oh man, I just have so many thoughts. You can always just use the blunt force tool. This is where it's like you don't worry about being overly articulate or anything, and you just say something to the effect of, "Hey, can I say something?" You're just asking for permission. You're just kind of pointing out, "Hey, there's no room for me to enter this conversation, and I'd like some room." And that works really, really well. And it's not really offensive either. Just say, "Hey, can I say something?" It works really good. That's kind of piggybacking on a technique. Again, I can't remember which book this comes from, but called, what is it called? Naming the dynamic. That's where there's some sort of dynamic that's being used by during a conversation, and it's not a productive one, and so you just kind of come out and say, the problem you're seeing. It's like you say something like, "I can tell you feel really strongly about this just by the way you talk about it, but I haven't had a chance to enter the conversation here. I'm wondering if you could, maybe you just, when you're done talking, remind me that I want to tell you about this story, okay?" Okay, ready, go, right? But you kind of point out to the other person, like, "Hey, you're not listening," or I haven't had a chance to say anything in this conversation. So you're kind of pointing out, like, "Hey, all this stuff you're doing, you're not getting away with it. I'm noticing it," and then you're naming the dynamic. It allows you to reframe things and move along. Oh gosh, that reminds me of another great story. I'm going to share it quickly. So I sit on the Sandy City Board of Adjustment, and on this Board of Adjustment, we occasionally get people who are appealing decisions of the Planning Commission, or they've applied for a variance from the zoning or the land use code. And the Board of Adjustment hears these things. A lot of times they're represented by attorneys, sometimes they're not. And a lot of times we always open up to public comment. Sometimes there are some really colorful commentary coming from the public. And so it's like perfect grounds for lots of conflict, right? And there was a recent one where one of the attorneys was, he kept saying to the board, he kept saying, "Well, your city attorney would say this and this and this, and he would tell you blah 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 blah." And so he was using as his authority the Sandy City attorney, who really provides a lot of the training and recommendations for the Board of Adjustment. And he kept saying this over and over and over and over. He really overplayed the card, and so at some point during his argument, I kind of interrupted him and just pointed out that he kept doing that. But I tried to do it in a humorous way instead of like a accusatory way. I think I said something like, hey, maybe we should, the city attorney's name's Steve. I said, maybe we should let Steve take the floor here. There's been a lot of talking on his behalf, and I'm wondering how comfortable he feels about everything that's been said. And, it's funny. Everyone started laughing, and the guy was like, oh, yeah, sorry, I'll stop doing that. So anyway, that was an example of naming the dynamic and then reframing, and it worked well. It wasn't offensive or anything. So those are some ways to deal with a real dominant personality. All right, so the second question was how to handle the superior, whether that's like a parent, a boss, or a leader, whatever, who has to have everything done his or her way, and there's just no budging them, right? They are really, really, they've got all the power, and they are completely uninterested in anybody else's feedback. And I got to tell you this, the principles that I've taught so far about dispute resolution and having these conversations go well, it is easier going down a hierarchy than it is going up. Those power imbalances make it harder. If you're the boss, yes, you can transfer someone to a different department. You can fire somebody. You have all these tools at your disposal. But if you're not, if you're going up the chain, if you're going up the hierarchy, you have a lot fewer methods at your disposal. But I've got to tell you, and I don't know, I don't know how to say this without coming across like, I don't know, arrogant. But this is probably like where I feel most confident in my conversation skills is when I'm going up a hierarchy, where dealing with power imbalances. I feel like that's where I'm like at my very best. These situations where I'm trying to go up the chain on something that's challenging. So let's talk about this. I want to just insert a little miniature rant here. It is so common in business. It's like for people to be bullies in business. That's like a leadership style, like the bully. And I don't know why that's so common, but it does sort of seem to me that a lot of people that have prominent positions in organizations, for them to believe that they've just earned the right to fully indulge their bad mood as just a perk of success. It's like, you know what? I have achieved so much here that one of my perks is I get to be just a complete dirtbag if I'm in a bad mood. I get to treat everyone like scum. And I don't know why people think that's like a perk of success, because it's not. It's not. It's offensive, and it really limits your power in the organization. But anyway, that's just my mini rant. It's kind of like a learned skill. People learn that sometimes, well, very often, you can get what you want by bullying. The problem is, although it might appear that you've gotten what you want, meaning you've gotten your way, you have no buy-in, you have no resources, you have very limited chances of actually succeeding without the support of the organization, which you lose when you bully. So anyway, that's my little rant. Here's like my secret. Here's my secret and the lens that I view power imbalance conversations through. There are lots of different kinds of power, and people often only narrowly focus on the power to control things, the power to control situations, which is what like a boss has or a parent has. They are in power. They have the final say. But that's not the only kind of power that exists. If you are subordinate to them, you still have power, but your power is different. It's the power of influence. And actually, the challenge of influencing a controller is just kind of thrilling to me. And it's, I don't recommend that other people feel this way, and I'm not encouraging it. But sometimes it's kind of thrilling to go into a situation where you have no controlling power and still find a way to influence an outcome in a way that you believe in. Does that make sense? I wonder if I'm making any sense on this at all. But it's kind of like the neck that turns the head. My wife always says that even if I think I'm the head of our household, that she's the neck and she controls everything I do, which is true. Yeah, it's very true. She can manipulate me, although I don't think she would call it manipulation. So anyway, so how do you influence a controller? That's the question. Well, first and foremost, know that there's no position required. You don't have to have any certain position to influence someone who has all the power. My secret on influencing them is that, and as I'm telling this, I'm like wondering if I should be sharing this secret, but I'm going to, because it might help you. So if you can convince the person who has the control that you understand that the decision is in their domain and that you don't have power over the decision, so they know that they don't need to be defensive, or they don't have to remind you who has the authority here. You put them at ease proactively, put them at ease that you understand their status. I think that's really critical. And then you also make it clear that they don't need to push back to what you're saying. So whatever you're offering, you're doing it in a way where you're not staking a position, right? I come into all of these situations with as close to a neutral perspective as possible. And probably this is best demonstrated by, if I could just like come up with like an example off the top of my head here, but I'll give that a shot. So let's say you go into a situation with your boss, and you could kind of put them at ease, saying something like, you're in charge here, and maybe you insert a little stroking. And it always seems like, no matter how tough the decision is, it always seems like you're able to work it out and get us through it. And I've got a lot of confidence that you'll be able to do that again here. So, you've got a little stroking. You've reminded them that you understand your position, you understand their position. Then you say something like, oh, I don't even know if this is helpful to you, but I can see both sides of this issue. You're saying blah 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 blah, right? And you're helping them understand, like, you get what they're saying and you understand their points, right? And now they're really tuned into you. They're listening to you. And then you can say, and it seems like they, whoever's on the opposite side of the issue, seems like they're more focused on X, Y, and Z. And, just as an outside observer, I think blah, 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 blah. And that would, this thing would be important to me, just, as an outsider looking in. And suddenly, you've got the leader, you've got this person in power who's really, really listening to you and is really understanding you, and they're understanding their own points and interests a little better, and they're understanding you've reframed the opposition's position to this leader, and now they understand them too. And that's how you can really influence leaders, I think. Another tip, I already said this, but using stroking with leaders really helps. It even helps with parents. Help them to feel accepted and help them to feel like you appreciate the work that they're putting in. That helps people to listen and open their minds to influence a lot. So, in summary, you can use influence. You do that by, you can't threaten their control. Remind them that you understand their status as the decision maker, and then provide them with some insightful perspective, right? And I always use the term as an outside observer because it's a very safe place to be as an influencer. You're not putting your neck on the line. You're saying, hey, as an outside observer, this is what I see. I don't use it just as like a little trick of communication. I use it as like an honest to goodness perspective that I try to take on when I'm in these difficult conversations going up the chain. Because it's just a very useful perspective. It's a useful perspective for a leader to know. And if you can provide it, they'll appreciate that. So those are my thoughts on this. And darn it, I didn't keep the episode as short as I wanted. I really wanted to keep it shorter this week, and I've blown it again. So I'm sorry, but I hope you enjoyed it. These stories are kind of fun. And again, take them, learn from them. Hopefully you can share your stories with me. For whatever reason, I didn't get hardly any feedback all week. So submit some questions to me. Let me know like what situations are hard for you. And also, I'd love to have some of you on the show. So if you have any interest or a story worth sharing, reach out to me. Let's get you on the show, share your story, talk about it, learn from it, and maybe inspire some other people to improve the interactions that they're involved in every day. All right, everybody. Share the show if you can. Invite other people to listen to it. It continues to grow. The dispute resolution revolution is marching on, guys. I love going out and seeing people I haven't seen in a while, and they tell me, hey, I'm listening and I'm working at applying some of these skills. And you know, I've reached out to my mother, who I haven't talked to in forever. Anyway, that just makes me so happy. And I'm just hoping everybody can start making more and more of an effort at this. I know I've been making more of an effort too. In my own life. So anyway, keep up the good work. Thank you again for listening. I really am. I'm so grateful that you guys would take time to focus on some of these skills. It makes me very happy. So keep up the good work. We'll talk to you next time.